The sirens painted the night in streaks of red and blue, flashing across our garage door like we were fugitives caught mid-getaway. Alicia stood frozen in the driveway, hands raised in disbelief as two police cruisers screeched to a stop in front of our Suburban two-story. A spotlight swept over her like she'd been pulled straight from a wanted poster. The gallon of milk she'd just bought sat at her feet, forgotten, leaking onto the concrete. From our living room window, I watched the whole thing unfold, toothbrush dangling from my mouth, toothpaste frothing as I mumbled, "You've got to be kidding me." A megaphone crackled. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Alicia, bless her soul, didn't move. She just blinked at the patrol car, calm as ever, even as she stood on our own driveway, in front of our own garage, with her own car keys still swinging from her finger. She could have been mistaken for a statue if not for the soft, rhythmic tapping of her foot, the only giveaway that she was this close to losing her patience, and standing across the street, hair twisted in a blonde bun so tight it looked like it hurt, stood Karen. Arms folded, lips pursed, and posture radiating the smug satisfaction of someone who just hit the HOA jackpot. She pointed like a colonial general. "That's her. That's the one," she shouted, as if we'd released a tiger into the neighborhood. Let's rewind for a second. "My name's Jordan. I'm a mechanical engineer who used to think the most stressful thing in life was getting a dent out of a carburetor. That was before we bought this house. Before we moved into Maple Glen, a neighborhood that markets itself as peaceful, private, and pristine. That's real estate code for, we enforce lawn heights and judge you for having Halloween decorations still up in November. Alicia and I had worked for this place. Saved for years. She's a nurse, 12-hour shifts, always tired but never too tired to dance in the kitchen to 90s R&B when dinner's on the stove. And that garage? That garage was her dream. 2-car, remote-controlled, insulated, she'd whispered, practically swooning during the tour. Me? I was just glad I'd never have to scrape ice off a windshield again. We'd been here 3 months. 3 months of trying to make this beige paradise feel like home. And for 2 months and 29 days, it was quiet. Peaceful, even. Then came the garage incident. The incident that turned a driveway into a war zone. Karen introduced herself on move-in day. Showed up with store-bought cookies and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just wanted to welcome the new neighbors," she'd said, leaning in a little too close to the welcome mat. "You'll love it here, as long as you respect the unspoken rules." That should have been the first red flag, but Alicia, ever gracious, had taken the cookies and thanked her. Looking back, I think it all started the first time Alicia parked her car in the garage. We'd just come back from Home Depot. Alicia was behind the wheel of her new black SUV, freshly waxed and practically glowing. She pulled into the garage like she owned the place, which she did. But the second the garage door started closing behind her, there was a knock on the driver's side window. "Karen," she was waving like there was a fire. Alicia rolled down the window, halfway confused, halfway annoyed. "Hey, I think there's been a mix-up," Karen had said, her voice saccharine and firm. "That's not your space." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "The garage?" Karen nodded, dead serious. "It's just, the previous owner let me use it. We had an understanding. I've been parking here for years." "Ma'am, we bought this house," Alicia replied, blinking like she'd just been told the sky was purple. "This is part of our property." Karen's eyes narrowed, her polite tone wobbling. "I just think, given the history, I should still be able to park here. I mean, I've been using it longer than you've even lived here." "Doesn't work like that," Alicia had said, and rolled the window up with the slowest, most satisfying push of the button I've ever seen. You'd think that would be the end of it. Reason had spoken. Garage doors had closed. Reality should have said it didn't. The next morning, there was a cone placed at the end of our driveway. Just one. Bright orange. No note. No explanation. Just sitting there like some traffic gnome guarding Karen's imaginary turf. I stepped out to move it, and Karen popped out of her door like a prairie dog with lipstick. "That cone is for safety purposes," she called. I smiled, trying to play it cool. "You afraid our garage is going to launch into orbit?" She didn't laugh. That weekend, we found a flyer slipped into our mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA, at least not officially. Just a typed note printed in Comic Sans that read, "Please respect neighborhood customs. Long-term residents should not be inconvenienced by new arrivals unaware of established usage patterns." Alicia read it, then held it up to the sunlight. "Did she seriously watermark this with a maple leaf?" "She did," I said, peering over her shoulder. "This is the HOA equivalent of a ransom note." We laughed, at first. Thought it was weird, sure, but not serious. People have a hard time adjusting to change. We gave her the benefit of the doubt. That was our mistake. Over the next week, Karen escalated. Every time Alicia came home from work, Karen was suddenly outside, watering the same patch of grass, trimming bushes that didn't need trimming, checking the sidewalk for cracks. And always watching. Always staring. Once, Alicia asked if she needed something. Karen just smiled and said, "Just keeping the neighborhood safe." "I'm a nurse," Alicia replied. "I save people's lives for a living." Karen smiled wider. "Oh, I'm sure you do." It wasn't long before the whispers started. Mr. Gil from 2 doors down asked me one morning if our garage was actually part of our deed. I nearly dropped my coffee. "What kind of question is that?" I asked. "Well, Karen says it's complicated," he muttered, shuffling away like a man trying to escape his own shoes. "Complicated. That's how delusions work, I guess. You repeat them enough times, and the world around you starts to squint at reality," which brings us back to the sirens. The cops. My wife standing in our driveway like a felon on trial for grand theft. Garage. When I opened the front door, the officers turned to me. One of them, Officer Dan, middle-aged, tired eyes, the face of a man whose lunch break had just been ruined, gestured toward Alicia. "She lives here?" "She owns this house," I said. "We both do." Dan sighed like he'd just walked into the middle of a high school drama club rehearsal. "We got a call about someone trying to break into the property." "Which property?" I asked. He pointed to our house. I looked over at Karen, who now had the audacity to wave at me, like she was doing us a favor. "That's her," she mouthed. I turned to Officer Dan. "Let me guess." Caller said someone suspicious was entering the garage. "Black SUV, black woman, Suburban emergency?" He didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. I stepped aside. "You want proof? Come in. We've got mortgage papers, utility bills, wedding photos in the hallway, and a welcome mat with our last name on it. Unless Karen thinks we stole that too." He raised a hand. "No need to get snippy." "Sir," Alicia said, finally lowering her hands. "All I did was come home from work and park my car in my garage." Dan nodded slowly. "Mind if I take a look at some ID?" She handed it over. "Driver's license. Matching address." Meanwhile, Karen stood back, fuming like a Karen denied a manager. Dan took his time, but even he could see the absurdity of it all. He handed the ID back with a low, almost embarrassed tone. "Looks like you're good here." Alicia nodded. "Thanks for the permission to be in my own house." The other officer, younger, leaned toward Dan and whispered something. Dan sighed again and turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we didn't find any cause for concern." Karen's face twisted. "You're just going to let them take it?" "It's their garage," Dan said, "but I've always..." He cut her off with a look that said, "Don't." We watched the cruisers pull away. The milk carton on the driveway was still bleeding slowly into the cement, white against the gray like a surrealist crime scene. I looked at Alicia, who bent to pick it up. "You good?" She exhaled. "I am now." From across the street, Karen was still staring, arms folded, jaw locked in a losing battle with logic that I wrapped an arm around Alicia. So, wanna park in the garage again tomorrow? She grinned. I was thinking I'd park sideways. Just to spice things up. And just like that, the war over the garage had officially begun. It should have ended with the cops driving off and Karen learning a hard lesson about boundaries and garages. But if you've ever dealt with someone like her, you know logic is more of a suggestion than a rule. The night after the sirens faded, Alicia and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping leftover coffee and trying to laugh it off. She really called the cops, over a garage, Alicia said, shaking her head. You think she's done? I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think the flashing lights and official shrug from Officer Dan had made the message loud and clear. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was the type who doubled down after being proven wrong. She didn't take no as an answer, she took it as a challenge. The very next morning, we found a new addition to our driveway. A sign that it was homemade, slapped together with a stake, plywood, and an aggressive sense of self-importance. Painted in thick red letters, private drive, not for community use, violators will be reported. It stood right at the edge of our property, like a line drawn in the sand by someone who never learned how property lines actually worked. Alicia stood in front of it, arms crossed, squinting at the bold lettering like it was a coded message from a less intelligent alien race. This is our driveway, she said flatly. I know, I replied. But apparently, Karen thinks she's just reclaiming her ancestral garage or something. I'm calling the HOA. She did. Left a message on their voicemail, then emailed just to cover all bases. We weren't trying to start a war, but the battlefield had already been chosen. And oddly enough, it was made of concrete. By the time we got home from work that day, the sign was gone. A small victory. We figured maybe someone with a brain from the HOA had intervened. Maybe reason had finally peered its timid little head over the fence and whispered, Karen, maybe stop being weird. Then came the cones. 4 of them, bright orange and arranged in a neat little line across the mouth of our driveway. I got home first, slowed to a crawl, and just stared. For a split second, I wondered if there was construction. A water main break. Maybe a squirrel had declared martial law. But nope, there she was. Karen. Standing on her front lawn, arms folded, supervising her traffic control masterpiece like it was a modern art installation. I rolled down my window. Problem here? No problem, she chirped. Just protecting my side. It's about time someone enforced neighborhood etiquette. Etiquette? She nodded like I'd just asked if the sky was blue. We have an understanding in this neighborhood. We don't hoard all the space. Hoard? Lady, it's a garage. It's not just about space, she said, stepping forward. It's about fairness. I've lived here 12 years. 12. The previous owners respected that. They knew how things worked. Well, I said, voice tight, the previous owners also had a hot tub in the living room and wallpaper that looked like clown vomit, so maybe let's not use them as a moral compass. That shut her up for a breath. Just long enough for me to back into the driveway, deliberately knocking one of the cones over as I went. She gasped like I'd run over her poodle. Alicia came home 30 minutes later, and by then Karen had replaced the cones. This time with a laminated sheet taped to one of them. Garage conflict, ongoing, please respect community compromise. Alicia stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then walked inside, dropped her purse on the counter, and said, I want to sue her. I raised a brow. For what? Misuse of stationery? For wasting my time. For giving me high blood pressure. For impersonating someone with common sense. It wasn't just the cones or the signs. It was the way Karen began treating us like we were squatters. She wouldn't speak to us, just glared, huffed, and pretended not to hear whenever we said hello. Her dog, a jittery little white puffball named Biscuit, had more manners. Worse still, the whispers continued. Mrs. Hill from around the corner cornered me during trash day. I heard there's been a misunderstanding, she said delicately, as if garage drama was too scandalous to name out loud. No misunderstanding, I replied, tossing a bag into the bin. Our garage, our property, end of story. But Karen says it's shared space. Like an unspoken rule. There's a deed, I said. There's no unspoken anything. She nodded, still skeptical. Well, I hope you two can find peace. She's just protective of her routines. Protective of her delusions, more like that. We tried being diplomatic. I even printed out a highlighted copy of the property map from our closing papers and left it in Karen's mailbox with a note that read, to clarify any confusion. Your neighbors. She returned it the next day. Ripped in half. Inside a Ziploc bag. Labeled, litter. By this point, Alicia was done playing nice. I don't even feel comfortable pulling into our own home, she said one evening, rubbing her temples. It's like every time I hit that garage remote, I'm daring her to make a scene. And she always accepts the challenge, I muttered, handing her a glass of wine. That we started documenting everything, photos, timestamps, any weird activity. Just in case. Not because we were scared, but because when someone's this committed to pretending your garage is their birthright, you stop assuming logic will save you. The final straw came the following Friday. Alicia got home after a brutal double shift. Her shoulders were tight. Her eyes tired. All she wanted was a shower, a blanket, and maybe a slice of leftover pizza. Instead, she found Karen standing dead center in the driveway, just standing there. Blocking the garage like a human barricade. Hands on hips. Sunglasses on, even though the sun had already dipped behind the rooftops. Alicia rolled down the window. Excuse me. Karen didn't move. I'm just making sure no one takes advantage of shared space again. This isn't shared. I'm not leaving. Alicia exhaled, then pulled the car into park. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped out. I was inside watching from the hallway window. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to sprint out if things went south. Karen, Alicia said, voice steady. Move. Now. Karen smiled. Not a warm smile. One of those patronizing, smug things people do when they think they've won. I've called someone, she said. We'll let them decide. Alicia blinked. Who? Karen pulled out her phone and waved it. Someone who handles this kind of thing. The words didn't quite register until the sound of distant sirens returned, again, and as those lights crested the hill, painting the neighborhood in pulsing red and blue once more, Alicia turned around, saw me watching from the window, and mouthed, round two. That was when I knew, this wasn't going to stop on its own. Karen wasn't going to get tired. She wasn't going to move on. She believed she had the right to dictate who could use the space behind our garage door, and no amount of paper, reason, or polite conversation was going to change that. The question now wasn't whether we were in the right. We were. The question was how far she was willing to go, and how far we'd have to go to finally make her stop. If you'd asked me a week ago whether a garage could spark a neighborhood conflict resembling a Cold War standoff, I would have laughed, maybe made a joke about territorial squirrels. But here we were, locked in what I had privately begun referring to as GarageGate, and Karen had just pushed the metaphorical red button. The second police visit hadn't fazed her. If anything, it emboldened her. The look on her face when the officers once again confirmed that yes, we were legally parked in our own garage, wasn't one of embarrassment, it was one of quiet, seething determination. She didn't care what the law said. She believed in a higher power, her own delusional sense of entitlement. 2 days later, Alicia came home to find something new. The garage door had been defaced. Not vandalized in the traditional sense, no spray paint or broken glass, but defaced in the most passive-aggressive suburban way imaginable. A sticky note mosaic, meticulously arranged to form the words, neighbors share. Each letter was a different pastel color. It would have been almost impressive if it hadn't been so deeply unhinged. Alicia stood there for a long time, hands on hips, just staring at it. Then she peeled a single note off, read it, and laughed. It said, "Be better." We filed another complaint. The HOA gave us their usual robotic non-committal response: "We will investigate the matter and take appropriate action." They might as well have sent a carrier pigeon with a shrug emoji. That weekend, things escalated. Karen installed a security camera on her side of the lawn, facing our garage. The lens was positioned just so, angled slightly downward, as if our garage door was a known criminal and she was preparing footage for a documentary titled The Threat Next Door. I walked out with the trash and caught her adjusting it. "Really?" I asked. "It's for safety," she said, tightening a bolt. "There's been some suspicious behavior in the neighborhood." "Suspicious like, living in our house and parking where we're allowed to?" She ignored me. Just turned the lens a little more. We could have ignored the camera. Could have just let it sit there and collect hour after hour of footage of Alicia entering and exiting the garage, carrying groceries, talking on the phone, occasionally tripping over the welcome mat. But it was the principle. The woman was watching our lives like a hawk that had confused civility for prey. Alicia, to her credit, kept calm. Calmer than I would have. She had that grace under fire thing going, the quiet strength that made you forget she spent her days dealing with medical emergencies. But even she had limits. And Karen was determined to test them. One afternoon, I got home early and found Alicia sitting in the car. Just sitting. Engine off, keys in her lap. She didn't even notice me walk up. "You okay?" I asked, gently tapping on the window. She opened the door slowly. She was out there again. Just standing. Watching me back in. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Like some judgmental statue. I looked across the street. Karen was gone now, but I didn't doubt the report. "She's trying to rattle you," I said. "Trying to make you feel like you don't belong." Alicia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah. And that's the problem. I do belong." We started planning, not revenge. Not yet. But defense. Precaution. I installed a motion sensor light above the garage. Alicia started keeping a voice recorder in her purse, just in case another confrontation escalated. We even had a lawyer friend review our deed and highlight every line that spelled out ownership in neon metaphorical ink. Still, Karen wasn't done. One morning, we awoke to find 2 bags of mulch dumped in front of the garage. Just mulch. No note. No explanation. Just enough to block the door from opening completely. Alicia stood over it like a detective at a crime scene. "She's reached new levels," she muttered. "She's inventing psychological warfare techniques." I moved the mulch, called it in to the HOA again, but we both knew nothing would come of it. The real tipping point came 3 days later. Alicia was pulling into the driveway when Karen rushed out of her house and slammed a trash bin directly in front of the garage. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't passive-aggressive. It was full-on hostile. Alicia got out of the car. "Move the bin, Karen." Karen stood her ground. "I'm tired of this, Alicia. You're making things uncomfortable for everyone." "For everyone?" Alicia repeated. "For the neighborhood," Karen said. "Your attitude, your disregard for community history, your refusal to share. We bought this house," Alicia said, voice steady but cold. "We own this space. We don't owe you access to our property." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't feel safe when you raise your voice." "I'm not raising my voice." "You feel aggressive," Karen said, shifting her stance. "And I'm allowed to feel unsafe." Alicia didn't yell. She didn't even flinch. She just pulled out her phone, hit record, and said, "Please state your full name and why you're blocking my garage." Karen blinked. "Are you threatening me?" Alicia didn't reply. Just kept recording. Eventually, Karen backed off. Dragged the bin away with theatrical flair. like she was doing us a favor. Alicia parked and walked inside without a word. That night, we had a long talk. "This is harassment," I said. "She's trying to make us snap so she can play the victim. She's hoping we'll leave," Alicia said. "She thinks if she makes it miserable enough, we'll sell and run." "Not happening." "No," she agreed. "It's not." The next day, we spoke to a real attorney. This time, formally. Explained the pattern of behavior. The obstruction. The confrontations. The false emergency calls. He listened, took notes, and then leaned back in his chair. "You've got a case," he said. "Harassment, misuse of emergency services, possible trespassing depending on how close she's getting to your property line. Can we stop her?" Alicia asked that he nodded. With the right documentation, and the right nudge, yes. And that was when Alicia's expression changed. The weariness that had lived on her face for weeks faded just a little. Something sparked in her eyes. "A quiet fire. She wants to play games," she said. "Then let's show her the rules." We weren't going to stoop to her level. No mulch wars. No screaming matches. We were going to do this the right way, with intelligence, with evidence, and with every legal resource we had. Karen wanted to escalate. She had no idea what escalation really looked like. It started with a clipboard and a tape measure. Two things Karen had never expected to see wielded by a man in khakis and sunglasses, stepping out of a Silver City vehicle and striding toward her lawn like it owed him money that he didn't knock. He didn't smile. He walked straight to the edge of her neatly trimmed grass and began measuring the boundary line. Karen came storming out in a matter of seconds, robe flapping, mascara half done. "Excuse me. Can I help you?" The man barely looked up. "City zoning enforcement. We've had reports of structures violating property lines." "Structures," she repeated, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was trying to fold herself in half. "Yes, ma'am. Specifically unauthorized signage, obstructions to driveways, and improper surveillance equipment directed at adjacent private property." I watched from my front porch, coffee in hand, leaning against the rail like I was watching a backyard baseball game. Alicia stood beside me, quiet but undeniably pleased. Her eyes never left the measuring tape as it snaked its way across the grass and gravel, right up to the stake that had once held one of Karen's private drive signs. "What is this about?" Karen snapped. "This is my land. I've lived here for 12 years. The inspector checked his notes. "That's not in question, ma'am. But our records indicate repeated complaints involving trespass, obstruction of access, and use of non-permitted surveillance on neighboring properties." Karen's voice rose. "Complaints from who?" He gave a polite, non-committal shrug. "Several sources. It doesn't really matter. What matters is compliance." Karen looked like she wanted to breathe fire, but the words got caught in her throat. She glanced over at us, eyes narrowed to slits. Alicia gave her a nod, not smug, not mocking. Just calm. Almost pitiful. Like watching someone realize they're the villain in a story they thought they were narrating. The inspector began taking pictures of the camera, the makeshift signs, the trash bin still lingering by the property edge. He handed her a folded notice. "This is a formal warning. You'll have 5 business days to remove these obstructions and cease any further unauthorized activity. Continued violations may result in fines or civil penalties." And then he was gone. No drama. No arguing. Just a clean, surgical strike of city-level accountability. It was beautiful. Karen stood alone in her yard, notice flapping slightly in the breeze, her jaw working silently like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the script. But that was just the first domino. The following day, Alicia and I received a letter in the mail. It was from the Homeowners Association. This time, not a boilerplate brush-off, but a formal acknowledgement. After a thorough review of documented incidents, audio, video, and written complaints, the HOA had determined that Karen's behavior constituted a pattern of disruptive, harassing conduct unbecoming of a resident. They had given her a warning before, some behind-the-scenes slap on the wrist that clearly hadn't stuck. This was different. This letter stated, plainly and legally, that if any future complaints were filed against her, the HOA would move to suspend her neighborhood privileges and consider legal remedies. They even sent a copy to our lawyer. 2 days later, Karen's prized security camera was gone. The lawn signs disappeared overnight. The cones, those obnoxious little orange sentinels, vanished like a magician's trick. Her house, once aggressively decorated with the smug armor of her protest, now looked oddly bare. Deflated that we didn't gloat. We didn't celebrate in the street or throw a block party. But we did sleep better. Alicia came home that Friday, parked in the garage without a second glance toward the other side of the street, and for the first time in weeks, there was no cold stare, no invisible pressure. Just peace, but karma wasn't quite done with Karen. We learned, in bits and pieces, that the city had slapped her with a small fine for the unauthorized signage and surveillance. Nothing huge, but enough to sting. Then came the kicker. During one of the inspections, it was discovered that Karen's backyard shed, her pride and joy, complete with string lights and a makeshift wine bar, violated setback codes. It was 2 feet too close to the property line. She'd have to move it. Or tear it down. Alicia raised an eyebrow when we heard. I almost feel bad. I sipped my tea. Almost. To her credit, Karen didn't confront us again. She didn't apologize either, of course. That would have required some admission of wrongdoing. But she avoided eye contact. She stopped patrolling the sidewalk. The air shifted. The tension, once thick enough to cut with a steak knife, began to fade. We reclaimed our space, not just physically, but emotionally. That garage, once the epicenter of ridiculous conflict, became mundane again. A place to park. To store tools. To open with a remote and forget about until the next oil change. But the story didn't just end with silence. One final scene remained. It was a Sunday. Early fall. Leaves starting to drift from the trees, sun hanging lower in the sky. Alicia and I were out front, planting new flowers by the mailbox, trying to inject a little color into the fading season. That's when we saw her, Karen, walking out to her car with a clipboard. Her usual posture, rigid, defensive, was missing. She moved slower, like someone carrying invisible weight. She hesitated before getting in, glanced over at us, and, for the first time, offered a nod, not a smile. Not a wave. But a nod. Alicia returned it, just as quietly. We didn't need an apology. The silence was loud enough. That night, as we settled in, I looked over at Alicia, curled on the couch with a blanket and her book. The house was quiet. The garage light had turned off automatically an hour ago. Nothing dramatic. Just normalcy. I smiled. So, we win? She looked up, eyes amused. We didn't win. We just lived. And didn't back down. Sounds like a win to me. She reached for her tea, took a sip, then added, next time she blocks the driveway, though. I'm getting a tow truck. And with that, the last of the tension evaporated. No speeches. No slow claps. Just 2 people, in their home, at peace. Finally, the garage. Still ours, always was.